Noelle. So just to make it clear, I personally don't care about making Noelle a driver. I doubt you do as well. So I've got Noelle on Ito's signature and
the largest change to the meta since Mauika's release.
So putting that all together, even someone like Noelle can reach 100k DPS, which is nuts. And
It can actually work well, both in double Hydro, because she has enough Geo application on field that
maybe you're pulling her on the Fontaine Chronicle Wish. You definitely want to start building a team like this. Lowland didn't work properly with Triple Geo unless you had her constellations. Whereas not only is Linnea stronger, she's designed for this.
Geo damage dealer, or like a quick swap, I guess, Geo damage dealer with the nuke shit. And she kind of just does okay damage, right? Without the extra damage.
That Linnea provides healing and Sucrose doesn't. So
Proper healer for a Nefer team, as weird as that sounds, because Nefer didn't really have like that much of a proper healer.
Best team in the game. It's not even really close at this point. Yeah, the team out of these that has the highest DPS on my account is this, the Skirk, Zabai, Linnea, Columbina team.
Hello everyone and welcome to another video of mine. Today we are going to look into the Linnea situation, which I'm really excited to talk about because it has been quite the situation. So this will be another unscripted video. It's just going to be me yapping the entire video, but I do have my notes so I don't go entirely off topic. So let's start with the first take that has been made about Linnea. So, did Linnea actually save Geo? If we look at Linnea's kit, what is the thing that her kit screams? It's essentially dogshit support for Zabai, of course. Like, that's the only association you have with her kit when you initially see it. And I'm going to repeat this multiple times. I'm not the fun police. It is okay to play fun team comps, but this end game, the end game right now is pretty hard. It's the hardest it has ever been. And I think making good recommendation is necessary, especially if you are a content creator with a wide audience. This video is not directly targeted towards anyone or any content creator in particular. I just think it's important to inform people. That's just a disclaimer before we actually start. But yeah, there's no hate to any content creators, and again, you can play the teams that you want to play, but when we are discussing optimal things, then the meta looks different. So Linnea's kit is, we have the base damage bonus for Lunar Crystallize, which basically only Zabai and Columbina can capitalize on because no one else does direct Lunar Crystallize damage. Of course, with the exception of the transformative Lunar Crystallize hits, which is a rather small portion of the team's damage. It can be quite high, but I will get to that. So the other thing is geo-resistant shred. She shreds a baseline of 15% and then 15% more if you have Lunar Crystallize the reaction, the pillars on the field. So the problem with this is that it always forces a Hydro character at least. So the other thing that she provides is the EM with her Ascension 4 passive. So how many Geo characters do you think that actually scale on EM that can take advantage out of this buff outside of the Lunar Crystallize reaction, which yes, she also enables? But other than that, is there a singular character? There isn't, of course. No character gets a direct bump in their damage, like the kit damage, if they gain this amount of EM. And the amount of EM, honestly, it is not high enough to justify the Lunar Crystallize reaction itself. Lunar Crystallize itself is still only balanced around having Zabai and Linnea and Columbina on the team. Otherwise, it can do a bit of damage, but it's not the main focus. And now the main part, which, I mean, we can already get into it. The rest of her kit is sub DPS. This sub DPS isn't tied to like anything other than the Lunar Crystallize reaction, and it is completely separate from anything that you do on field. It is not influenced by anything you do on field. So it is effectively a wheelchair if there's no one else taking advantage out of the other buffs. And that is the main thing about Noelle, Ito, Navia. All of these characters, if you put Linnea with them, the team is always going to be like somewhat okay, like pretty decent with the new shield and stuff. But at the end of the day, it is a wheelchair, especially if you use Colombina. If we remember, Colombina is also purely a Luna buffer. Before C2, at C2, she also buffs defense. But then we have the problem that this defense buff is only for Noelle and Ito. Navia can take advantage out of this, and neither can Ningguang. So you hear all of this and then you might still think, oh, okay, so, but Linnea's teams make the Geo characters at least viable. Like, what is the alternative to Linnea if I don't want to play these teams that are objectively the teams that do the most damage with these characters, which actually isn't entirely true, because you can do anything. You can just put Nefer, you can put Navia into a Nefer team, and obviously it is going to be like Navia's best team, or Navia into a Zebai team. That doesn't really have to say anything. So what is the alternative? The alternative is simply C2 Zhelaunen. I'm actually like surprised that people still forget about this, but all of Zhelaunen's buff didn't magically disappear. She still buffs more than Linnea. C2 is by far like ahead of Linnea, but then at C0 she just simply has the scroll set. Her signature technically also buffs if you happen to have gotten it, and funnily enough Linnea's signature also gives this damage percent, but it is actually less damage percent, so I'm not sure why we are debating this. But this obviously brings two more problems. First of all, not all the Geo characters can run a double Geo, double 2-patch team, which is Zhelaunen's preferred archetype, otherwise she doesn't buff before C2. If you have C2, then it's not a problem anymore. But yeah, that is a problem, but only for Noelle and Ito specifically. And then you just have to ask yourself, would you either pull Linnea and get like one increase to the team, but it is a wheelchair, so you are probably going to bench the wheelchair if there is a new one that drops, because the wheelchairs don't last. We get a new wheelchair every 2 patches, and it was the same with Mavrika Silali. Then we got something similar with Inefa, and now it's Linnea. So like it doesn't last. I want people to realize that. And by wheelchair I specifically mean teams where the on-fielder doesn't have any kind of synergy with the 2 characters that do most of the team's damage. Obviously, if it's like a can take advantage out of all of these buffs situation, then it is great. But otherwise, you just have an unsynergistic team and you're just going to bench it eventually. But yeah, the other thing I just recommend is to wait until they actually drop Noelle buffs, or wait until future units are released that are actually more suited for these archetypes. And this is specifically the case with Navia, because in these new teams, Navia doesn't get a singular attack buff. So all of her attack scaling multipliers are just completely underutilized, which is why you see those 250k Navia skills. And it is exactly like with Jianyun back in the day. People forced Jianyun into Navia teams because she can plunge, so she will plunge. And it might look like a 2% increase over her other teams, but in practice it just felt pretty bad. It was way too single target focused, and the setups were kind of so and it needed Farina and yada yada yada. You get it. Like it didn't feel like a real Navia team, and it is something similar with the new Linnea teams in my opinion. So just wait till we get a new Navia support, a Pyro support, some kind of attack buffer. That can always happen. Anyway, so did Linnea actually save Geo? No, this is like saying that Lauma saved Dendro or something. Lauma did not save Dendro. Lauma just invented a new archetype and is now performing with Nefer as like the best / second best / whatever best carry in the game at the moment. She's just doing her thing, and it's not really like she revived Dendro. And this same concept applies to this new Geo archetype, which I've also seen people unironically run Igloo with like Noelle, Ito, and Navia. No, please don't do that. Igloo basically barely buffs anyone other than Zebai, because his direct Luna hits are much better in terms of buffing than anything else, and it's like half of his kit that you're basically sacrificing. So it is not worth it, even at C6 in my opinion. Linnea and Igloo are basically exclusive Zebai supports, and anyone who's like more into the meta, more into Stygian clears will know that. But just for the other people, Linnea is on banner right now. Do not pull Linnea if you aren't planning to pull Zebai, unless you just want to have fun with Linnea, unless you just like the teams that she makes. But in terms of efficiency, in terms of wanting to clear content, Linnea doesn't really help with that. She can open more options, she can be an IT, but that doesn't really matter if you can't clear the damage checks of Stygian. So with that out of the way, let's get into the next topic. So the take has been made multiple times that Linnea is this new ceiling support, that she just buffs Zebai to be the best carry in the game by far, and it's like a whole Mavrika situation all over again. That is propaganda. That is not true at all. I'm not saying that the game is not doing power creep. It is doing power creep, but the power creep was Nefer and Lauma. It was not Zebai and Linnea. Zebai and Linnea are still power creep in a way, because they are like at the same level of Nefer. But the difference between Nefer and Zebai is so negligible, and at early investments or like early vertical, like Zebai does outperform Nefer slightly, and also it is highly dependent on Igloo C6, but yeah, she does outperform her, but only slightly, and the difference is so small, and there's obviously a huge gap on at unlimited cost between Nefer and Zebai, which is Nefer outperforming Zebai, but obviously people aren't really interested in that. I get that, but I think they are just so close that it doesn't matter which one of the two you like, and it just depends on the matchups, which matchups are more in favor of Zebai and which matchups are more in favor of Nefer. They are basically head-to-head in terms of carry performance. Okay, after discussing a bit more with other theory crafters as well as looking into it myself, I have to admit I did underestimate the gap between Zebai and Nefer. The thing is, it depends on multiple things. First of all, how good is your gameplay? If you cannot proc Instructor, it's like the gap is like there. It is a small gap. If you can't use Sucrose, if you have to play Sustain, then the gap is bigger. And if you literally cannot do any combos on Nefer, you just don't dash cancel at all, then the gap is huge. But I think at that point Flynn is probably better than Nefer. If you can't play Sustain, if you can't do Instructor Sucrose, and you can't do the dash cancels, which are very easy to do, very recommendable, yeah, at that point I don't think Nefer is better than Flynn's. But if you consider all those things, they are quite similar, and if you don't give Zebai her Igloo, then I think she has the edge. The thing is, on KQMs, the gap is there because Nefer doesn't scale with, she absolutely doesn't scale well with KQMs. KQMs doesn't properly reflect Nefer's strengths, which is why we should use a higher standard because it's biased towards certain characters. But yeah, Nefer is a very high investment type character, especially because she's a hyper carry as well. And I want to advocate for try hard gameplay. Because if you're already maximizing substats, you're clearing Stygian because you want the feathers, you want to maximize the characters, why not put that bit of effort as well into your gameplay and improve your combos and learn new strategies? It's also fun to learn new strategies. I'm having a blast learning new strategies. And I really want to recommend this to everyone. But yeah, no matter how you put it, Zabai is not 30% above everyone else. That's just not the case. If that's the case, then you probably just can't play the game well and you shouldn't care that much about the placements of the top tier carries. I think you should be interested in other kind of gameplay. But no judgment there. But like seriously, we want to talk about ceiling. We also want to talk about optimized gameplay. And then there's the other thing, which is that Mavrika and Skirk are still holding up, and Mualani to some extent. These characters are in the, I would say, Zabai, Nefer, and Flint's kind of are the more easy characters to play. With a lower skill ceiling, but Mavrika, Skirk, and arguably Mualani, but in my opinion Mualani is definitely easier out of the three. Mavrika and Skirk specifically have a really high skill ceiling, and this skill ceiling helps them basically outperform both Nefer and Zabai at all of their shield bosses. I'm not even bad testing, it is simply the truth. Although you do need to keep in mind that it is always these like limit showcases always take some kind of C6 Yansan, C6 Auroron that is like really hard to get on Mavrika banners. So C6 or like Yansan was a Mavrika banner, but if C0 Mavrika, it is really hard to justify the C6 4-star. So But it is noteworthy that Mavrika's performance is this good at that level, and especially C2 performance, because at C2 it's much more justifiable to assume C6 Yansan, and at that level she has done multiple 3 cost clears of Dire, and that is something that people might say, oh, Dire performance, I don't really care about that. But if you are good at these combos and you do have the vertical to do it, then that also means you are saved for all these Stygian stages, even if you only do Fearless. Because she can brute force so many bosses as we've seen. And this kind of brute force isn't really there for Nefer and Zabai. Nefer and Zabai are so restricted by this interaction, both Luna Bloom and Luna Crystallize, that as there's a bit of mechanical difficulty, some kind of extra mechanic, then they just kind of have to nerf the team too much to account for it. The best example is Nefer with Pyro MC against Papilla, or Nefer with the Cryo Automaton. That is just kind of cope. She does perform really well against those bosses, unironically, just because her damage is that good and her vertical is that good. But do keep in mind that there's more matchup flexibility for Mavrika. And the thing is, Nefer and Zabai are actively getting shielded at the moment. That is another thing. Because this is the main reason why they are hyped up so much. Not just because of the performance against the dummy. And that's the other thing. The dummy performance, well, things often don't really line up the way they do against the dummy. And I want people to realize that dummy DPS counts less than Stygian clear. Stygian clears is the main game mode. You don't use the dummy to clear Stygian. You use Stygian to clear Stygian, basically. Just for everyone to keep that in mind. But yeah, as I'm seeing the game right now, I think that Zibai, Nefer, Mavrika and Skirk are the top 4. And then a bit below are Flins and Mualani, who are still situationally as strong as these other 4. But Mualani has less matchups and Flins just has less damage. That's the main thing. But yeah, guess what? This basically means that Mavrika was the big damage increase, or it was the big bad power creep, as some people like to say. Not really Nefer and Zibai. Nefer and Zibai brought it to another level, specifically also on unlimited cost, and just sheet wise they just outperform. But in practice, Skirk and Mavrika can keep up due to their matchup flexibility. Otherwise, I would agree, Zibai and Nefer would just be power creep. And also, don't get me wrong, Flins isn't far enough off of these two. I don't want anyone to get this impression. Flins is still up there, and the difference is also negligible. You can count Flins into the top 6 if you want to. I mean, he is top 6 anyway, so but like in the top 6 with the big gap, I would say that about Flins and Mualani for sure. And obviously, the thing I haven't discussed yet, how big is Linnea actually for Zibai? The thing is, Zibai had a vertical path already. People don't realize that Linnea, because Linnea doesn't really have team flexibility, she is purely a vertical step. And this is a bit embarrassing to admit for some people, but getting Linnea for Zibai team is a vertical step. They are verticaling. And it is the same exact thing as getting a constellation. I don't know why people make a difference. It is like getting Farina for Skirk. It is a one more pull to one team, aka vertical. And as a vertical step, Zibai already had this strong 3-cost team, which was C2, Zibai, and then C6 Iglua, C6 Goro, C6 Aino. And this team is not that far off. It really wasn't a big bump in terms of that 3-cost team. And the new one, the C6 Iglua one, has 1 cost less chance of getting C6. It's a bit complicated to explain, a bit of cost brain rot, but basically there's 1 less chance because it's 1 less pity, or like 2 less pity if you lose the 50-50, to get that C6 Iglua, which is the important key. So I hope this also helps people realize that Linnea wasn't this big huge thing. Linnea is obviously still good in the meta. I think I consider her worse than both Zibai as well as Nefer and Lauma, simply because there are technically other options. You can do C2 Zibai and her value decreases if you go for C2 Zibai and a bit of Colombina vertical, but I don't think that is optimal, and Linnea would obviously be worth pulling at some point. But Linnea and Colombina are the same in terms of increase for C0 Zibai, that I also want everyone to know. She's not like a Lauma situation, far from that. Lauma is like a 60% something increase for Nefer. Nefer is unplayable without Lauma, but Zibai can at least get her own C2, so if you really hate Linnea for some reason, you can actually do C2 Zibai. And there is no difference between those, because unless you need Linnea for Imaginarium Theater, there is virtually no difference between getting that Linnea or getting the constellations, because you aren't playing Linnea and other teams. Anyway, let's go to the next point. The wheelchair and the sub DPS, a question that many people have been pondering about. When does a sub DPS become a wheelchair? When is a wheelchair actually good? Is Flint a wheelchair? All of these questions. So, as I've already mentioned before, a wheelchair is only a wheelchair if the on-fielder has no particular synergy or very weak synergy with the off-field characters, and the off-field characters are the majority of the team's damage. That's how I would summarize a wheelchair, basically. Now, why am I and some other content creators so critical of wheelchairs? Why do we not factor them in when talking about theory crafting? The thing is, these wheelchairs don't last. A wheelchair is basically like the Mavrika Silali thing, and Mavrika Silali just didn't last. People stopped playing Mavrika and Silali simply because it did less damage than Inef or Columbina, for example. That is simply true, I cannot disagree with that. But it also will probably change going into 7.x with a new potential wheelchair. And why is that so different compared to like benching an old character because they don't do damage anymore? You can still make that character do damage by doing other things. Maybe if they get buffed themselves, like Venti, or they get new synergistic teammates. Like Ayaka is a great example of someone who didn't get a wheelchair. The Ayaka Shenhe Farina team, Escoffier, is the main one I need to mention, yeah. Escoffier completely revived Ayaka, gave the team a whole new identity, and Ayaka's not getting wheelchaired by Escoffier. Ayaka's still like 50%, 60% of the team's damage if she's well played. Obviously, if you play her like trash and give her like overbuild energy recharge, then she's going to perform more like a wheelchaired character. But otherwise, that's a great revival, and we might see more of these revivals going into 7.x. It is always important to stay optimistic regarding Genshin's meta. I know it has been going into a bad direction, but there is hope still. I just want everyone to know that. Because they are buffing characters, they don't like straight up just not care about old characters, otherwise they wouldn't have done that first batch of buffing. Mona basically became an S tier support overnight. She's basically better than Farina, in my opinion. Which I guess is a hot take. But she's similar to Farina. Let's just put it like that. But yeah, that is basically all to summarize the wheelchairs. You can still pull for these wheelchairs if you really like the wheelchair, if you like Linnea, if you like Columbina. There's nothing stopping you. All power to you. But if you want the most important, important strategy for investing, then do not pull for wheelchairs. And there's this other thing that I forgot to mention, which is Linnea instead of Sucrose. Just don't. Linnea, Sucrose, this is just too small of a section to make an extra section. But Linnea and Sucrose, if you seriously want to argument that you don't have a healer, why would you pull for Linnea instead of Lauma C1? Lauma C1 is in the same patch. You can pull Lauma C1 in like 10 days or something. Why not just save up for Lauma C1, get the better constellation that leads you to C2 Lauma, which is the huge increase, instead of going for Linnea, who you are going to bench anyway? Why not just stick with Sucrose? Yeah, that sums it up. There's nothing more that I want to talk about. I might do another rant for Nicole, because Nicole also has like some of the worst takes made about her recently. So stay up for that if you want to see that. And see you in the next one. I'm excited to be hopefully uploading more and more like scripted videos, obviously, because this was more ranty. But yeah, see you then. Bye bye everyone.